Have you ever heard of Ismael El Mayo Zambada? The mastermind who's always one step ahead of the law, managing to vanish just when capture seems inevitable. How does a figure remain so elusive in the age of high-tech surveillance and relentless global intelligence efforts? Today, we delve into the shadowy existence of El Mayo, a man more ghost than flesh in the eyes of those who chase him. What does it take for someone to disappear without a trace in a world that watches everything? Consider this. Zambada has been on the run for over 4 decades, evading capture through the mountains of Sinaloa and leaving behind a trail of legends and rumors. He's outlasted many of his contemporaries, navigating a dangerous landscape where betrayal is common and loyalty is rare. Is it sheer luck, or is there a method to his ghostly existence? How many times can someone slip through a net before it's considered impossible? With authorities continually reporting near misses, and Zambada reportedly orchestrating operations from the shadows, one has to wonder, is he the ultimate survivor of his era, or simply untouchable? Join us as we explore the cunning escapes and the intricate manhunt that repeatedly ends with those haunting words, "He's gone again." Is El Mayo Zambada destined to be a figure of myth, forever a phantom in the narco world? Or will his shadowy dance with destiny come to an unexpected end? Stay tuned as we piece together the puzzle of one of the most mysterious figures in criminal lore. Claudia updated its blacklist of the most wanted fugitives and, surprisingly, Ismael El Mayo Zambada no longer appears on it. They were just 3 steps behind on a February morning in the Golden Triangle when an unprecedented operation was deployed. Naval forces moved deep into the mountains to conduct what seemed like routine operations. However, in the midst of these procedures, they were actually executing a surprise operation aimed at capturing the legendary capo, Mayo Zambada. This man, who has evaded capture for many years despite his lifelong involvement in narcotics trafficking, had everything prepared. Intelligence had provided a report on Mayo Zambada's current location. Immediately, security forces headed to the ranch where they expected to encounter Ismael, the top capo of Sinaloa. Despite the swift reaction and the raid, they met strong resistance, and once again, MZ had escaped. In this installment of Narco Coyote, by the late 70s, this elusive criminal had never been handcuffed. He had always managed to escape from compromising situations and evade the authorities' net. His wealth has corrupted the highest spheres of power, and he is known to have informants everywhere. This has provided him with a shield and the capability to react against his enemies. This time, it seems he slipped away again, and the military was left just 3 steps behind Ismael, also known as MZ, or the Big M of the 5th month, popularly nicknamed El Mayo Zambada. Born into the rugged landscapes of El Alamo, Sinaloa, Ismael Zambada was introduced to the harsh realities and paradoxical opportunities of his environment from a tender age. As a young boy, Zambada didn't spend his days in classrooms learning math or history. Instead, his education was grounded in the sprawling opium fields that painted his family's farmland deep shades of poppy red. Here, under the harsh Mexican sun, he first learned the art of cultivation, not of ordinary crops, but of the potent poppies that were the lifeblood of the regional economy. As Zambada grew from a child toiling in the fields to a young man, his ambitions grew as well. The trade of opium offered more than just survival. It offered power and prosperity to those willing to navigate its perils. During this time, the landscape of the drug trade was markedly different from today. The drug lords of the 1970s, often referred to as capos, were seen less as outlaws and more as unconventional businessmen. The authorities' lax focus on narcotics allowed these figures to operate in a gray area of the economy, where they were integrated into the fabric of local commerce, rather than ostracized from it. In the world of the 70s, these narcos were known for their dangerous potential, yet there existed an unspoken code of honor among them. Conflicts and agreements were settled not with the gun, but with a handshake. A man's word was his bond, and to break it was to do parties not just one's business, but one standing in the tightly knit community of traders and locals alike. This era was devoid of the hyper-violent turf wars that would later define the landscape of drug trafficking. Instead, disputes were handled quietly and often without the need for bloodshed, reflecting a period where subtlety and strategy outweighed brute force. As Zambada navigated through this complex web, his innate understanding of both agriculture and the dynamics of the drug market propelled him forward. He wasn't just participating in the family business, he was mastering it, setting his sights on the broader implications of his trade. It was this strategic foresight and ambition that eventually led him to transcend his early role as a mere farmer of narcotics. He began forging connections, slowly and meticulously, building a network that would, in time, expand his influence far beyond the fields of Sinaloa. Thus, the foundation was laid for a legacy that would not only mark the drug trade of his time, but also shape the operations of future generations. As the authorities began to clamp down on narcotics, the dynamics of the trade would evolve dramatically, but the roots planted by men like Zambada in the era of quiet dealings and respected words would endure, weaving his story into the complex tapestry of Mexico's narcotic history. This is the generation Ismael Zambada grew up in, and like any other alkaloid merchant, he ended up linking to a group, none other than the Guadalajara cartel, which was led by Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo, along with Ernesto Fonseca Carrillo and Rafael Caro Quintero. The business in Mexico operated with a hierarchy from then on. Bribes and commissions were paid, which allowed the capos to have relationships with the authorities and rulers of the time. Clashes between the sides were not usual, since the organizational chart was generally respected. The diplomatic relations between the government and the narcos were directed by the group's leader, as mentioned earlier, Felix Gallardo. The profits were so exaggerated that the number of consumers increased in the main market, the United States, and soon the anti-drug agencies began to realize that something was happening in the neighboring country because the authorities did not pursue drug dealers much. In view of this, they delegated the mission to an agent who would be in charge of thoroughly investigating what was happening in Mexico. Enrique Camarena, or Kiki Camarena, would start his arduous investigative task, but in the midst of his work, he ended up being tortured and riddled with bullets, allegedly by the leaders of the Guadalajara cartel. This crime caused the United States authorities to focus on the members of the Guadalajara cartel, and, motivated by the violence and the death of their agent, they would end up imprisoning the main leaders of this organization. This sought to set a precedent for the capos in Mexico, but led to a fragmentation of all crime in Mexico, because those from Guadalajara were just the tip of the iceberg of the entire drug trafficking problem. Soon, the violence that would be unleashed by the ambition to have total control of the business would come to light. Ismael Zambada observed the fall of his colleagues and, foreseeing what was to come, identified that he could not remain isolated. Reading the situation, he decided to ally himself with a group of men, among them one who stood out for his boldness and greed, a hitman who worked for Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo. The man in question was Joaquin Archivaldo Guzman Loera. Despite his small stature, he was greatly feared, hence he was given the alias El Chapo. Together with this man, they built the business of the Sinaloa cartel. Mayo took charge of strengthening alliances with influential people and managing the finances of the organization. Evidently, Chapo would be the one who showed his face as the visible capo of the Sinaloa cartel, while the Big M remained behind the camera, not showing his image. This was known many times when Chapo was always labeled as the most bloodthirsty capo of the time, and therefore he was always the priority target of the United States. In fact, the state of Chicago labeled Guzman as public enemy #1 for the amounts of drugs that entered those cities, and it was generally Guzman who was blamed for everything. However, the truth is that this drug was property of the Federation or the Sinaloa cartel, and he would also have responsibility. Only because of his way of operating and trying to stay in the shadows of the mafia, like a chess player who only moves his pieces, as it is already known. In 1993, Chapo was apprehended in Guatemala and was in prison all this time, operating behind bars. But in 2001, Ismael Zambada would be in charge of orchestrating and financing the escape of his ally. With Chapo on the streets again, a countless number of confrontations between cartels for the control and dominance of the majority of the plazas would arise. Clearly, those of the Sinaloa cartel prevailed in these conflicts and managed to centralize power for a few years. At this point, Chapo would also be indicted as the main responsible for that death, and Ismael was rarely linked to these violent events. Again, law enforcement would apprehend Chapo, this time in 2014, and the next would be Ismael Zambada. But in the midst of the arduous search by the authorities, Mayo would again ensure Guzman's ticket to freedom through a tunnel. Chapo would leave prison to embark on a path of pursuits because, in that 2015, all law enforcement forces turned to search for the escaped capo. And again, Mayo Zambada had taken a back seat. The recreation time for the capos would soon pass because Chapo would be recaptured in 2016 and finally extradited to the United States the following year. With this, once again, Mayo Zambada was in the eye of the hurricane, and the pursuit would resume to apprehend the only old capo who had not been in a prison. But mysteriously, the search by the authorities took another direction and would again fall on the Guzman family. This time the targets would be Chapo's sons, Ovidio, Archibaldo, and Alfredo. There have been many attempts to search for or capture Ismael Zambada, but none has been definitive. It is estimated that his current location is in the Golden Triangle, and in the mountains, he remains guarded with the support of the surrounding villagers who protect him for his generosity, where he is seen as a hero or benefactor who has given them schools, hospitals, lighting, sports fields, and other works that the state has never conferred on these remote populations. This shows that before the military advances in his area, Mayo Zambada would already been informed. That's why the operation that was advanced in February to try to apprehend him had no favorable result. But again, they were very close and were 3 steps away from capturing MZ. Intelligence reported a ranch deep in a wooded area, and at this location, the man with the hat was immediately found. The operation was deployed with helicopters patrolling from the air, but upon reaching the marked point, they were received with bursts of AK-47s. The response was with bullets, and in a few minutes, they took control of the perimeter. Entering the ranch, they found the rooms unmade, the stove on, and as if that were not enough, some dishes on the table. In other words, the capo had been there very recently, but mysteriously someone had warned him of the deployment of men at the location, and he had again escaped. Determining who would be the informant that thwarted the operation is very difficult, because it can be deduced that it would be among the ranks of law enforcement, but also among the inhabitants and villagers of the area as mentioned. MZ is usually protected by these people who reside in this sector. In any case, Mayo always gets ahead of law enforcement, and it can be concluded that he has informants in all formal and informal areas, and this has guaranteed his impunity since it is rumored that on occasions he has been apprehended, but with a few calls has come out well unscathed from the situation. Since MZ many owe him favors, and his money has touched the pockets of many incorruptibles. And do you think that Mayo will one day go to prison? Share your opinions on the video in the comment box. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and activate the bell to not miss our next videos. See you in the next one.